Hey guys, tonight we're going back to ancient Egypt to uncover one of the most powerful love stories ever told. You might think you know the tale of Isis and Osiris, but this isn't just a myth about gods and death. This is a story about a love so fierce it defied the boundaries between life and the afterlife itself. Tonight you'll discover how one woman's devotion literally resurrected a king and changed Egyptian belief forever. If these kinds of ancient stories help you relax and drift off to sleep, go ahead and hit that like button. And let me know in the comments, do you believe love can be powerful enough to overcome death? Now, let's journey back thousands of years. Let's walk the banks of the Nile. Let's enter a world where gods walked among mortals and where the greatest love story of all time began. Our story begins at the very dawn of creation itself. The world was young, the land of Egypt was new, and the gods were just beginning their reign over the earth. The sky goddess Nut had given birth to 5 children, 5 divine beings who would shape the destiny of Egypt forever. These children were born on 5 special days, days that existed outside the normal calendar, days that were neither part of the old year nor the new year. The first child was Osiris. He was born on the first of these sacred days. The moment Osiris entered the world, a voice rang out across the heavens. The voice proclaimed that the Lord of all the earth had been born. Osiris was destined for greatness from his very first breath. The second child was Horus the Elder. He came into the world on the second sacred day. This Horus was different from the more famous Horus who would come later, but he too was a god of the sky. He too had a place in the divine order. The third child was Set. Set was born on the third sacred day, but Set's birth was different. Set did not wait to be born naturally. Instead, Set tore his way out of his mother's womb. He ripped through her side in his eagerness to enter the world. This violent birth was a sign. It showed the nature Set would carry throughout his existence. The fourth child was Isis. Beautiful Isis. Wise Isis. She was born in the marshlands of the delta. She was born among the papyrus reeds. She was born in the wetlands where the Nile met the sea. From the moment of her birth, Isis was special. She carried magic in her blood. She carried wisdom in her heart. The fifth and final child was Nephthys. She was born on the last sacred day. Nephthys would become the goddess of morning and night. She would stand as a protector of the dead. These 5 divine children grew together. They learned the ways of the gods. They discovered their powers, and among them, a special bond formed. Osiris and Isis were drawn to each other from the beginning. Even in the womb of their mother Nut, they had loved each other. Their souls were intertwined before they even took their first breath. This was a love that predated their existence in the world. This was a love written in the stars themselves. As they grew, their love deepened. Osiris was tall and strong. His skin was green like the fertile earth. His presence brought life wherever he walked. He had the bearing of a king. He had the wisdom of a ruler. He understood the needs of both gods and mortals. Isis was beautiful beyond measure. Her intelligence matched her beauty. She studied the secrets of magic. She learned the hidden names of power. She became the greatest magician among all the gods. Her knowledge grew vast. Her power grew immense. But her greatest strength was her capacity to love. When the time came, Osiris and Isis married. Their union was celebrated across the heavens. The stars themselves shone brighter on their wedding day. The Nile flooded with abundance. The land rejoiced at the marriage of these 2 divine beings. But not everyone celebrated this union. Set watched his brother's happiness with growing darkness in his heart. Set had wanted Isis for himself. He had desired her beauty. He had craved her power. But Isis had chosen Osiris. She had given her heart completely to the green-skinned god, and Set's jealousy began to grow like a poison in his soul. Set married Nephthys, but his heart was not in this marriage. Nephthys was kind. Nephthys was loyal. But she was not Isis, and Set could not forget what he had lost. After their marriage, Osiris became the king of Egypt. He ruled over the land with Isis by his side. Together, they brought civilization to humanity. They taught mortals how to farm the land. They showed humans how to plant wheat and barley. They revealed the secrets of making bread and brewing beer. Before Osiris came, humans lived like savages. They wandered the land without purpose. They ate raw meat. They knew nothing of agriculture or order. But Osiris changed everything. He walked among the people. He taught them with patience. He showed them how to plant seeds in the rich black soil left by the Nile's floods. He demonstrated how to harvest grain. He revealed how to grind flour and bake bread in clay ovens. Isis worked alongside her husband. She taught women the arts of weaving and spinning. She showed them how to make cloth from flax. She shared the secrets of healing herbs. She became the protector of wives and mothers. She embodied all the virtues of a perfect queen. Together, Osiris and Isis brought law and order. They established justice. They created a society where people could live in peace. Egypt flourished under their rule. The land became a paradise. The people prospered. Art and culture bloomed like lotus flowers on the Nile. But Osiris did not keep these gifts only for Egypt. His generous heart wanted to share civilization with all humanity. So Osiris decided to travel the world. He would bring his teachings to every land. He would civilize all peoples. Isis remained in Egypt to rule in her husband's absence. She governed wisely. She maintained the order they had established. She kept Egypt safe and prosperous, and she waited for her beloved to return. While Osiris traveled the world spreading civilization, Set remained in Egypt. Set watched Isis rule with wisdom and grace. Set saw how the people loved their queen. Set observed how prosperous Egypt had become. And with each passing day, Set's jealousy grew stronger. Set had always lived in Osiris's shadow. Osiris was the elder brother. Osiris was the rightful king. Osiris had won the heart of Isis. Osiris was beloved by gods and mortals alike. Everything Set wanted, Osiris possessed. Set was the god of chaos and the desert. He ruled over the barren lands beyond the Nile's reach. His domain was storm and violence. His nature was destruction. Where Osiris brought life, Set brought death. Where Osiris created order, Set embodied disorder. The contrast between the brothers could not have been greater. Osiris's skin was green like growing things. Set's skin was red like the desert sand. Osiris was patient and kind. Set was impulsive and cruel. Osiris built civilizations. Set tore them down. As the months passed, Set's resentment festered. He began to plot. He started to scheme. Dark thoughts filled his mind during long desert nights. He imagined himself as king. He dreamed of taking everything his brother had. He fantasized about claiming the throne of Egypt for himself. But Set knew he could not simply challenge Osiris directly. Osiris was too strong. Osiris was too beloved. The other gods would never accept Set as king if he openly murdered his brother. Set needed a plan. He needed cunning. He needed treachery. So Set waited. He bided his time. He smiled at his brother when Osiris returned from his travels. He pretended friendship. He concealed his hatred behind a mask of brotherly affection. And all the while, his plot took shape in the darkness of his heart. Osiris returned to Egypt after many years abroad. He had traveled to distant lands. He had crossed deserts and mountains. He had sailed unknown seas. Everywhere he went, he taught humanity the gifts of civilization. He showed them agriculture and law. He gave them music and art. And now he came home victorious. The people of Egypt celebrated their king's return. They lined the streets of the great cities. They threw flowers before his feet. They sang songs of praise. Osiris had left Egypt prosperous. He returned to find it even more magnificent under Isis's wise rule. Isis welcomed her husband home with joy overflowing. The separation had been long. The months apart had felt like years. But now Osiris was back. Now they were together again. Their love had not diminished during his absence. If anything, it had grown stronger. They ruled together once more. They walked in the palace gardens. They sailed on the Nile in the royal barge. They held each other under the stars. Their happiness was complete. Their love was perfect. They had everything they could desire. But Set watched them with eyes full of poison. He saw their happiness, and it burned him like fire. He heard their laughter, and it cut him like knives. Every moment of their joy was torture to his jealous soul, and his plot began to take its final form. Set gathered allies. He found 72 conspirators who would help him. Some were motivated by greed. Some desired power for themselves. Some simply enjoyed causing destruction. Set promised them rewards. He promised them positions of authority. He promised them wealth beyond measure, and they agreed to help him destroy Osiris. Set began his plan with careful precision. First, he needed to know Osiris's exact measurements. He needed to know his brother's height. He needed to know the breadth of his shoulders. He needed to know every dimension of Osiris's divine body. So Set visited his brother often. He acted the part of a loving sibling. He embraced Osiris. He stood close to him. He memorized every detail. And Osiris, trusting and kind, suspected nothing. Osiris believed in Set's pretended affection. He thought his brother had finally overcome his jealousy. He hoped Set had found peace. Once Set had gathered all the measurements he needed, he went to the finest craftsmen in Egypt. He commissioned them to build a chest. But this was no ordinary chest. This was a masterpiece of carpentry and art. The chest was made of the finest wood. It was decorated with precious metals. Gold and silver adorned its surface. Intricate designs covered every inch. Jewels sparkled on its lid. It was beautiful beyond description. It looked like a treasure worthy of a king. But the chest had a sinister purpose. Set had designed it to fit one person perfectly. The measurements matched Osiris exactly. The length was precise, the width was exact, the depth was calculated to the smallest detail. This chest was a trap disguised as a treasure. When the chest was completed, Set organized a great feast. He invited all the gods and nobles of Egypt. He invited Osiris and Isis. He spared no expense. The food was magnificent. The wine flowed freely. Music filled the air. Dancers entertained the guests. It seemed like a celebration of brotherhood and peace. Osiris came to the feast with Isis. They dressed in their finest clothes. They wore their ceremonial jewelry. Osiris was happy to see his brother showing such hospitality. He thought this feast meant Set had finally accepted him as king. He believed Set's jealousy had ended. He relaxed his guard. The feast went on for hours. The guests ate and drank. They laughed and told stories. They played games. The atmosphere was joyful. No one suspected the darkness lurking beneath Set's smile. No one saw the trap being prepared. Finally, when the moment was right, Set called for attention. He clapped his hands. The music stopped. The conversations died down. Everyone turned to look at the red god standing in the center of the hall. Set gestured to his servants. They brought forth the magnificent chest. They placed it where all could see. The candlelight danced across its golden decorations. The jewels caught the light and sparkled like stars. Everyone gasped at its beauty. Set smiled. He announced that this chest was a gift. He said he would give it to whoever fit inside it most perfectly. It was a game. It was entertainment for the feast. Whoever fit the chest exactly would win it as a prize. The guests were intrigued. One by one they tried to fit inside the chest. Some were too tall, some were too short, some were too broad, some were too thin. None fit perfectly. The chest seemed impossibly specific in its dimensions. Finally, Set turned to Osiris. He invited his brother to try. He used flattery. He said surely a king as magnificent as Osiris would fit this magnificent chest. He urged Osiris to lie down inside it. Osiris hesitated for just a moment, but he saw no harm in this game. He trusted his brother. He believed in Set's apparent change of heart, so Osiris agreed. He approached the beautiful chest, and he lay down inside it. The fit was perfect. The moment Osiris lay down inside the chest, Set's trap was sprung. The 72 conspirators rushed forward. They had been waiting for this exact moment. They had been positioned throughout the hall. Now they revealed their true purpose. They slammed the lid of the chest closed. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. Osiris was trapped inside. He tried to push the lid open. He struggled against the wood, but the conspirators held it shut with all their strength. Set shouted commands. His servants brought nails and hammers. They drove the nails through the lid. They sealed the chest completely. Each strike of the hammer was like a blow to the heart of everyone watching. The guests stood frozen in horror. They could not believe what they were seeing. Osiris pounded on the inside of the chest. His muffled cries could be heard through the wood. He called out for help. He called for Isis. But the conspirators worked quickly. They brought molten lead. They poured it over the seams of the chest. The lead sealed every crack. The lead made the chest completely airtight. The pounding from inside grew weaker. Osiris's cries became fainter. The god was suffocating. The god was dying. Even divine beings need air to breathe. Even immortals can be killed by treachery and cunning. Isis screamed. She tried to rush forward. She tried to reach her husband. But Set's conspirators held her back. They restrained her with brutal force. She struggled against them. She called upon her magic, but she had been caught completely by surprise. Her power needed focus. Her spells needed concentration, and her mind was consumed with horror and grief. The other guests fled in terror. They ran from the hall. They wanted no part in this crime. They feared Set's wrath. They feared becoming his next victims. The feast hall emptied. Only Set, his conspirators, and the imprisoned Isis remained with the sealed chest. Inside the chest, Osiris took his last breath. The great god died. The king of Egypt was murdered by his own brother. The lord of civilization was killed by the god of chaos. It was a crime that would echo through eternity. Set laughed. His laugh was terrible to hear. It was the sound of triumph and madness mixed together. He had done it. He had killed his brother. He had removed the obstacle between himself and the throne. Now, nothing stood in his way. But Set knew his crime was not complete. He needed to dispose of the body. He needed to hide the evidence. He needed to make sure Osiris could never return, because in the world of the gods, death was not always permanent. Magic could bring back the dead. Spells could restore life. Set needed to make absolutely certain his brother stayed dead. Set's conspirators lifted the heavy chest. They carried it from the palace. They moved through the darkness of night. They brought it to the Nile River, the great river that gave life to Egypt, the sacred waters that Osiris himself had blessed. And there, in an act of ultimate desecration, they threw the chest into the water. The chest splashed into the Nile. It bobbed on the surface for a moment. Then the current caught it. The river carried it away. The chest floated downstream. It moved faster and faster. It traveled through the darkness. It passed villages and temples. It journeyed toward the sea. Set released Isis. He proclaimed himself the new king of Egypt. He declared that Osiris had abandoned his throne. He claimed the right to rule. His conspirators supported his claim. They spread lies throughout the land. They told false stories about Osiris's disappearance. But Isis knew the truth. Isis had witnessed her husband's murder. She had seen Set's treachery. She had heard Osiris's dying cries, and her heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces. Isis fell to her knees. She tore her robes. She covered herself in dust and ashes. She wept with a grief so profound it shook the heavens. Her cries of anguish echoed across Egypt. The sky itself seemed to darken with her sorrow. But Isis was not just a grieving widow. She was the greatest magician among all the gods. She was wise and powerful. She was determined and strong. And she made a vow that night. She swore she would find her husband's body. She vowed she would bring him back. She promised herself and the gods that death would not be the end of their love. Isis cut off a lock of her hair. This was a sign of deepest mourning. She dressed in the dark robes of a widow. She left the palace where Set now sat on the stolen throne, and she began her search. Isis traveled the length of Egypt. She walked along the banks of the Nile. She asked everyone she met if they had seen the chest. She described it in detail. She spoke of its golden decorations. She mentioned its jeweled lid. She begged for any information. But no one had seen the chest. The Nile had carried it away too quickly. It had passed in the night. It had disappeared like a dream. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And still Isis searched. She walked until her feet bled. She cried until she had no more tears. But she never gave up. She never stopped looking. Her love for Osiris drove her forward. Her determination never wavered. She would search forever if necessary. Isis questioned the river birds. She asked the crocodiles. She spoke to the fish. The creatures of the Nile remembered Osiris's kindness. They wanted to help. But they too had not seen where the chest had gone. The current had carried it beyond their knowledge. Finally, Isis met some children playing by the river. Children have sharp eyes. Children notice things adults miss. These children had seen something strange several months ago. They had seen a beautiful chest floating past. They had watched it drift toward the delta. They had seen it carried out toward the great sea. Isis's heart leaped with hope. She blessed the children. She thanked them with gifts. And she continued her journey. She traveled north. She followed the Nile to where it met the sea. She walked through the delta marshlands where she had been born. She searched the papyrus reeds. She looked along every channel and waterway. But the chest was not there. The sea had claimed it. The waves had carried it away. Osiris's body had left Egypt entirely. It had traveled to foreign lands. It was lost in places Isis had never been. Isis stood on the shore. She looked out at the endless water. The Mediterranean stretched before her. The waves crashed against the sand. The task seemed impossible. How could she search an entire sea? How could she find one chest in all that vastness? But Isis did not despair. She called upon her sister Nephthys. Nephthys had always been loyal. Nephthys had not joined Set's conspiracy. Nephthys mourned Osiris too. She came to help Isis in her search. Together, the two sisters began to travel beyond Egypt's borders. They would search the entire world if necessary. They would never stop until they found Osiris. Their determination was absolute. Their love was stronger than death itself. The chest containing Osiris's body had indeed traveled far from Egypt. The Mediterranean currents had carried it across the sea. The waves had pushed it north and east. Day after day, the chest floated on the endless water. It drifted under sun and stars. It rode through storms and calm seas alike. Finally, after a long journey, the chest washed ashore. It came to rest on the coast of a distant land. This land was called Byblos. It was a Phoenician city far from Egypt. The people there did not know Osiris. They did not worship the Egyptian gods. They had their own customs and their own beliefs. The chest came ashore near a young tamarisk tree. The tree was small and delicate. It grew on the beach where fresh water met salt water. It was an ordinary tree. But what happened next was far from ordinary. The moment the chest touched the roots of the tamarisk tree, something miraculous occurred. The divine essence of Osiris, even though his body was sealed and dead, still held immense power. That power flowed out from the chest. It seeped into the tree. It filled the tamarisk with supernatural energy. The tree began to grow. It grew faster than any natural tree could grow. Its trunk thickened. Its branches spread. Its roots drove deep into the earth. Within hours, the small tamarisk had become enormous. Within days, it had grown into the most magnificent tree anyone in Byblos had ever seen. And as the tree grew, it did something even more remarkable. It grew around the chest. The trunk expanded and enclosed the golden coffin completely. The wood wrapped around it like protective arms. The chest became hidden inside the massive trunk. No one could see it. No one would suspect it was there. Osiris's body was now imprisoned within a living tree. The tree became famous throughout Byblos. People came from all over the city to see it. They marveled at its size. They wondered at its beauty. They had never seen a tamarisk grow so large. They whispered that it must be blessed by the gods. The king of Byblos heard about this miraculous tree. His name was Malkander. He was a good king who loved beautiful things. He went to see the tree himself. When he saw it, he was amazed. He had never seen such a perfect specimen. The trunk was straight and strong. The wood looked magnificent. King Malkander decided he wanted this tree for his palace. He would cut it down. He would use it as a pillar to support the roof of his great hall. It would be a centerpiece of his palace. It would show all visitors the glory of Byblos. So the king's workers came with axes and saws. They cut down the magnificent tamarisk tree. The tree fell with a great crash. They trimmed its branches, they shaped the trunk, they carried it to the palace, and they installed it as a pillar in the king's hall. The pillar was beautiful. Everyone who saw it praised its appearance. The wood had an unusual sheen. It seemed to glow with an inner light. A sweet fragrance came from it. The smell filled the entire palace. It was the scent of myrrh and lotus. It was the divine essence of Osiris trapped within the wood. But no one in Byblos knew what the pillar truly contained. No one suspected that inside this beautiful column lay the body of Egypt's murdered king. The chest remained hidden, Osiris remained entombed, and the pillar stood in the palace for many months. Meanwhile, Isis continued her search. She and Nephthys travelled from city to city. They asked questions everywhere they went. They described the chest to everyone they met. They followed every rumour and every hint. Their journey took them along the coast. They travelled through foreign lands. They spoke to merchants and sailors. They questioned travellers. And slowly they began to hear stories about a miraculous tree in Byblos. A tree that had grown impossibly fast. A tree that smelled of divine fragrance. Isis felt something stir in her heart. She had an intuition. She sensed a connection. Could this tree be related to Osiris? Could her husband's divine essence have caused this miracle? She had to find out. Isis and Nephthys traveled to Byblos. They entered the city as humble women. Isis disguised herself as a mourner. She wore simple robes. She covered her divine beauty. She did not reveal that she was a goddess. She wanted to move freely. She wanted to ask questions without drawing attention. Isis went to the shore where the miraculous tree had grown. She felt Osiris's presence immediately. His essence lingered in the sand. His energy still marked the spot. She knew with absolute certainty that her husband had been here. The chest had washed ashore at this very place. But the tree was gone. The space where it had stood was empty. Only a stump remained. Isis asked the local people what had happened to the tree. They told her about King Malkander. They explained how he had taken the tree for his palace. They described the beautiful pillar in the king's hall. Isis's heart raced. She knew Osiris was inside that pillar. She could feel it. After months of searching, she had finally found her husband, but now she faced a new problem. How could she retrieve his body? How could she take the pillar from the king's palace? She needed a plan. Isis went to the palace. She observed it carefully. She watched who came and went. She noticed that the queen of Byblos had servants who attended her. The queen was named Astarte. She had recently given birth to a son. The royal household was busy with caring for the infant prince. An idea formed in Isis's mind. She would use her disguise to get close to the royal family. She would gain their trust. She would find a way to the pillar, and then she would reclaim what was hers. Isis positioned herself by the palace well. This was where the queen's servants came to draw water. She sat quietly, appearing to be just another mourning widow. She braided her hair in elaborate patterns. Her fingers moved with supernatural skill. The braids she created were works of art. When the queen's servants came to the well, they noticed Isis. They saw her beautiful hair braiding. They were fascinated by her skill. They approached her. They asked if she would teach them how to create such braids. Isis spoke kindly to them. She showed them simple techniques. As she worked with their hair, she breathed upon them. Her divine breath carried a wonderful fragrance. The scent clung to the servants. It made them smell like flowers and spices. When the servants returned to the palace, Queen Astarte noticed the change immediately. She asked where the wonderful smell came from. The servants told her about the woman by the well. They described her skill with hair. They praised her gentle manner. Queen Astarte was intrigued. She wanted to meet this woman. She sent her servants back to bring Isis to the palace. Isis accepted the invitation. Her plan was working perfectly. She was about to enter the palace where Osiris's body lay hidden. Isis entered the palace of Byblos. She walked through its halls as a simple woman. She kept her divine nature hidden. She appeared humble and respectful. Queen Astarte welcomed her warmly. The queen was charmed by this mysterious stranger. They spoke together for a while. Isis told stories of distant lands. She spoke in a gentle voice. She showed wisdom in her words. Queen Astarte felt drawn to this woman. There was something special about her, something the queen could not quite name, but she felt comfort in Isis's presence. The baby prince began to cry. The infant needed attention. Queen Astarte looked tired. Caring for a newborn was exhausting. She had many duties as queen. She had little time to rest. She needed help with her son. Isis offered her services. She said she had experience with children. She said she would be honored to serve as nurse to the prince. She spoke with such kindness that Queen Astarte agreed immediately. The queen felt she could trust this woman completely. So Isis became the nurse to the royal baby. She moved into the palace. She was given rooms near the nursery. She cared for the infant prince with tender attention. And now she was inside the palace. Now she was close to the pillar that held her husband's body. But Isis did not act hastily. She was patient. She was careful. She needed to maintain her disguise. She needed to win the complete trust of the royal family. So she devoted herself to caring for the baby prince. Isis fed the baby, not with milk, but with her finger dipped in divine nectar. She gave the child small amounts of ambrosia. This was the food of the gods. It would make the baby strong. It would give him supernatural vitality. Isis was generous even in her grief. Even while mourning her husband, she blessed this innocent child. But Isis wanted to give the prince an even greater gift. She decided to make him immortal. She would transform his mortal body into something divine. She would burn away his mortality and leave only the eternal essence. This was powerful magic. This was a ritual that required secrecy and care. Each night, after the palace grew quiet, Isis performed her ritual. She would place the baby in the fireplace. But these were not ordinary flames. These were sacred fires. These flames would not harm the child. Instead, they would slowly burn away his mortal nature. While the baby lay in the magical flames, Isis would transform herself. She would reveal her true form. She would become a swallow. This small bird represented the morning soul. Isis would fly around the pillar. She would circle it again and again. She would sing lamentations. She would weep for Osiris. The pillar would respond to her presence. It would glow with soft light. The fragrance would grow stronger. Isis could feel her husband inside. She could sense his essence. She would speak to him in the language of the gods. She would promise him that soon, very soon, she would free him. This ritual continued for many nights. The baby prince grew stronger with each passing day. His transformation toward immortality was progressing. Isis's vigil around the pillar continued. Everything was going according to her plan. But one night, Queen Astarte could not sleep. She worried about her son. She decided to check on him. She rose from her bed quietly. She walked through the dark corridors of the palace. She approached the nursery. As Queen Astarte drew near, she heard strange sounds. She heard the chirping of a bird. She heard words in an unknown language. She saw light flickering under the nursery door. Fear gripped her heart. What was happening to her baby? The queen pushed open the door. The sight that met her eyes filled her with terror. Her infant son lay in the fireplace. Flames surrounded him. A swallow flew in circles around the great pillar. The bird was singing in a voice that seemed almost human. Queen Astarte screamed. She rushed forward. She snatched her baby from the flames. She held him close to her chest. She expected to find him burned. She expected to find him injured or dead. But the baby was perfectly fine. He was warm but unharmed. He even seemed to be glowing with health. The swallow's song stopped abruptly. The bird landed on the floor. And before Queen Astarte's astonished eyes, the bird transformed. It grew larger. It changed shape. It became a woman. But not just any woman. The figure that stood before the queen was clearly divine. She radiated power and majesty. She was revealed as a goddess. Isis stood in her true form. Her disguise was broken. Her divine beauty shone forth. She wore the crown of Egypt. She carried the symbols of her power. She was magnificent and terrible to behold. Queen Astarte fell to her knees. She trembled with fear and awe. She clutched her baby tightly. She did not understand what was happening. She did not know if she should feel grateful or terrified. Isis spoke. Her voice was sad but not angry. She explained who she was. She told Queen Astarte that she was Isis, the great goddess of Egypt. She said she meant no harm to the child. She had been trying to give the prince a precious gift. She had been making him immortal. Isis explained that the ritual was almost complete. Just a few more nights and the transformation would have been finished. The prince would have lived forever. He would have been immune to disease and age. He would have become something more than human. But the ritual had been interrupted. Queen Astarte's scream had broken the spell. The magic had been disrupted at a crucial moment. Now the transformation could not be completed. The prince would remain mortal. He would live a normal lifespan. He would grow old and die like all humans do. Queen Astarte wept. She felt both relief and regret. Relief that her son was safe, regret that she had cost him immortality. She apologized to Isis. She said she had not known. She had only wanted to protect her child. Isis forgave the queen. She understood a mother's instinct to protect her baby. She bore no ill will. But now Isis had a request. She needed the queen's help. She needed King Malkander's permission. She needed something that belonged to the royal palace. Isis pointed to the great pillar, the pillar that held up the roof of the hall, the pillar that everyone admired for its beauty. Isis told the queen that this pillar contained something precious. Inside the wood was the body of her murdered husband. Inside the tree was Osiris, the king of Egypt. Isis explained her story. She told of Set's treachery. She described the sealed chest. She recounted her months of searching. She spoke of her undying love for Osiris. She told how the chest had washed ashore and how the tree had grown around it. Queen Astarte listened with tears streaming down her face. The story was heartbreaking. The goddess's devotion was overwhelming. Astarte's heart was moved by such profound love. She promised to help Isis. She would speak to her husband. She would convince King Malkander to give up the pillar. Queen Astarte went to her husband immediately. She woke King Malkander from his sleep. She told him everything she had witnessed. She described the swallow and the flames. She explained about the goddess disguised as a nurse. She recounted Isis's tragic story. King Malkander was stunned. A goddess had been living in his palace. A goddess had been caring for his son. And now she needed his help. The king felt honored and humbled at the same time. He agreed without hesitation. He would give Isis the pillar. He would help her reclaim her husband's body. The next morning, King Malkander ordered his workers to carefully remove the pillar. This was not easy work. The pillar supported the roof. They had to install temporary supports first. They had to work slowly and carefully. But finally, they lowered the great column to the ground. Isis approached the fallen pillar. She placed her hands upon the wood. She could feel Osiris inside. She could sense his presence so clearly now. Tears ran down her divine face. She had searched so long. She had traveled so far. And now, finally, she was reunited with her beloved. Isis used her magic to split open the wood. The trunk cracked along its length. The two halves fell away, and there, inside, was the golden chest. It was exactly as she remembered it. The decorations still gleamed, the jewels still sparkled, but the chest was sealed tight with lead and nails. Isis embraced the chest. She held it close. She wept over it. She spoke to Osiris through the wood and metal. She told him she had found him. She promised him she would make everything right. Her grief was so powerful that everyone who witnessed it began to weep as well. King Malkander and Queen Astarte stood nearby. They were moved by the goddess's sorrow. They offered Isis anything she needed. They gave her a ship to carry the chest back to Egypt. They provided sailors to crew the vessel. They loaded it with supplies for the journey. But before Isis left, she did something for the royal family of Byblos. She blessed them for their kindness. She blessed the baby prince. Even though she could not complete his transformation to immortality, she gave him her protection. She promised he would be a great king when he grew up. She blessed the city of Byblos itself. She said it would prosper and be renowned throughout the world. Isis also did something with the remaining wood from the pillar. She anointed it with sacred oils. She wrapped it in fine linen. She gave it back to King Malkander as a sacred object. She told him to place it in a temple. The wood still carried Osiris's divine essence. It would be a holy relic. People would come from far and wide to see it and receive its blessings. Then Isis, carrying the chest containing Osiris, boarded the ship. The sailors raised the sails. The ship left the harbor of Byblos. It turned south toward Egypt. Isis stood at the stern, never taking her eyes off the chest. She was bringing her husband home. The journey across the Mediterranean was swift. The winds favored them. The seas were calm. It seemed the gods themselves wanted Isis to succeed in her mission. The ship cut through the blue waters. It passed islands and coastlines. It drew closer and closer to Egypt. Finally, they reached the mouth of the Nile. The ship entered the great river. Isis felt overwhelming emotion as she returned to her homeland. She had left as a desperate searcher. She was returning with her husband's body. The first part of her quest was complete. But Isis knew she could not simply sail up the Nile to the palace. Set was still on the throne. Set still had his conspirators. If they learned she had found Osiris's body, they would try to take it. They would try to destroy it completely. Isis needed to be careful. She needed to hide the chest somewhere safe. Isis ordered the sailors to stop at a secluded spot in the delta. This was the marshy region where she had been born. She knew this land intimately. She knew places where no one would think to look. She would hide the chest here. Then she would figure out how to bring Osiris back to life. The sailors helped Isis carry the chest ashore. They placed it among the tall papyrus reeds. The marsh plants grew thick and high. They concealed the chest completely. No one passing by would see it. No one would suspect a divine king lay hidden in this swamp. Isis thanked the sailors. She blessed them for their service. She sent them back to Byblos with gifts for King Malkander. Then she stood alone with the chest in the marsh. Finally, she was ready to open it. Isis used her magic to break the seals. The lead melted away. The nails pulled themselves free. The lid of the chest lifted. And there, inside, lay Osiris, her husband, her love, her king. Osiris's body was preserved perfectly. Death had not marked him. He looked as if he were merely sleeping. His green skin still glowed softly. His features were peaceful. But he was not breathing. His heart was not beating. He was truly dead. Isis bent over the body. She kissed Osiris's cold lips. She embraced him. She wept over him. Her tears fell on his face. She called his name again and again. But Osiris did not wake. His spirit had left his body. It had traveled to the underworld. Bringing him back would require the most powerful magic Isis had ever attempted. But before Isis could begin her resurrection spell, she needed help. She needed her sister Nephthys. She needed Anubis, the god of embalming. She needed to prepare Osiris's body properly. She needed time and privacy and sacred materials. Isis left the chest hidden in the reeds. She placed protective spells around it. She created wards that would alert her if anyone approached. Then she left to gather what she needed. She would return soon. She would begin the ritual of resurrection. She would bring Osiris back from death itself. But Isis made a terrible mistake. In her grief and exhaustion, she underestimated her enemy. She did not consider that Set might be hunting in the delta that very night. She did not think about what would happen if the god of chaos stumbled upon her hiding place. She believed her protective spells would be enough. That night, Set went hunting in the marshes. He loved to hunt at night. He enjoyed stalking prey in the darkness. He took his bow and arrows. He took his hunting dogs. He went into the papyrus reeds looking for wild boar and waterfowl. The moon was full. It cast silver light across the marsh. Set moved quietly through the reeds. His dogs ranged ahead of him. They sniffed the ground. They searched for the scent of game. Suddenly, the dogs began to bark. They had found something. Set followed them. He pushed through the tall papyrus, and there, in a small clearing, he saw it. The golden chest. The chest he thought he had sent to the bottom of the sea. The chest containing his brother's body. Set stared at the chest in disbelief and rage. How was this possible? He had thrown this chest into the Nile himself. He had watched it sink beneath the waters. He had been certain it was lost forever. Yet here it was. Here it was in the marshes of the delta. Someone had found it. Someone had brought it back to Egypt. Set knew immediately who that someone must be. Isis, his cunning sister-in-law, his brother's devoted wife. She had found Osiris. She had brought him home. And Set knew what that meant. Isis would try to resurrect Osiris. She would use her powerful magic to bring him back to life. All of Set's plans would be destroyed. Set's rage exploded like a thunderstorm. He roared into the night. His anger shook the papyrus reeds. His fury caused the marsh birds to take flight in terror. He had killed Osiris once. Now he would have to do something far more extreme. He would have to make absolutely certain his brother could never return. Set approached the chest. He saw that it was already open. The lid lay to the side. He looked inside. There was Osiris, still dead, still unmoving. But his body was intact. His body could potentially be brought back to life. Set could not allow that to happen. Set reached into the chest. He grabbed Osiris's body. He pulled it out. He laid his brother's corpse on the ground. And then Set did something unspeakable, something so terrible that it would horrify the gods for all eternity. Set drew his knife. The blade gleamed in the moonlight, and Set began to cut. He cut Osiris's body into pieces. He dismembered his brother's corpse. He divided the body of the king of Egypt into separate parts. Set worked with methodical fury. He cut the body into 14 pieces. Some say it was 42 pieces. The exact number varies in different tellings. But what matters is that Set scattered these pieces far and wide across Egypt. He wanted to make sure they could never be reassembled. Set took one piece and threw it into the Nile. The crocodiles would eat it. He took another piece and buried it in the desert. The sand would preserve it but hide it forever. He took a third piece and gave it to one of his followers to bury in a secret location. Each piece went to a different place. Each piece was hidden in a different way. Set scattered Osiris's body across the entire length of Egypt, from the delta in the north to the cataracts in the south, from the eastern desert to the western wasteland. The pieces were distributed throughout the land. Finding them all would be nearly impossible. Bringing them together would be an overwhelming task. When Set finished his horrible work, he laughed. He laughed with the satisfaction of complete victory. Now Osiris could never return. Now the throne of Egypt was truly his. Now nothing could stop him. Set left the empty chest lying in the reeds. He returned to his palace. He celebrated his success. But Set had made a critical error. He had underestimated Isis once again. He had not realized the true depth of her power. He had not understood the absolute nature of her devotion. Set thought he had won, but the battle was far from over. The next morning, Isis returned to the marsh. She came with Nephthys. She came with sacred oils and burial linens. She came ready to begin the resurrection ritual. But when she arrived at the hiding place, she found only an empty chest. The protective spells had been broken. Osiris's body was gone. Isis fell to her knees. She screamed with anguish. The sound carried across the delta. Birds fell silent, animals cowered. The very air seemed to vibrate with her grief. She had been so close, she had found Osiris, she had brought him home, and now he was taken from her again. But then Isis noticed something. She saw footprints in the mud. She recognized them. They were Set's footprints. She saw marks where something had been dragged. She saw drops of divine blood on the papyrus reeds, and she understood what had happened. Set had found the body. Set had taken Osiris. But had he simply hidden the body again, or had he done something worse? Isis used her magic to see what had occurred in this place. She looked into the recent past. She witnessed Set's horrible deed. She saw him dismember Osiris. She saw him scatter the pieces. The vision ended. Isis opened her eyes. Nephthys stood beside her, also weeping. Both sisters had seen the truth. Both understood the enormity of the task ahead. Osiris's body had been cut into pieces. Those pieces were scattered across all of Egypt. To resurrect Osiris, they would first need to find every single piece. They would need to reassemble the body completely. It seemed impossible. How could they search an entire kingdom? How could they find pieces that Set had deliberately hidden? How would they even know where to look? The task was overwhelming. It would take years, perhaps decades. Perhaps it could never be accomplished at all. But Isis did not give up. Isis never gave up. She stood and dried her tears. She looked at Nephthys with determination burning in her eyes. They would search Egypt from end to end. They would find every piece of Osiris. They would put him back together. And then, somehow, they would bring him back to life. Nothing would stop them. Not distance, not time, not even death itself. Isis and Nephthys began their search immediately. They decided to split up to cover more ground. But first, they needed allies. They needed helpers who could search in places the goddesses could not easily go. They needed eyes and ears throughout Egypt. Isis called upon the creatures of the Nile. She summoned the crocodiles. These powerful beasts lived in the river. They traveled its entire length. They could search the waters where one piece had been thrown. Isis made a pact with the crocodiles. She promised them eternal protection. She swore that Egyptians would honor them as sacred animals. In return, the crocodiles would help search for Osiris's remains. Nephthys called upon the jackals. These clever animals roamed the deserts. They scavenged at the edge of civilization. They could search the barren places where Set had buried some pieces. Nephthys promised the jackals would be honored in death rituals. She promised they would be associated with Anubis, the god of embalming. The jackals agreed to help. Isis also enlisted human help. She went to the common people of Egypt. She told them what had happened. She explained that their beloved king Osiris had been murdered and dismembered. She asked for their assistance. She promised that any town where a piece of Osiris was found would be blessed. A temple would be built there. That place would become sacred. The people of Egypt loved Osiris. They remembered how he had civilized them. They remembered his kindness and wisdom. They hated Set for his treachery. So they agreed to help Isis. Farmers searched their fields. Fishermen searched the river. Priests searched the temples. Everyone in Egypt joined the search for Osiris's scattered remains. The search for Osiris's scattered body parts became the greatest quest Egypt had ever known. Every village participated. Every town sent out searchers. From the Mediterranean coast to the deep south, people looked for their murdered king. It was a search driven by love and loyalty. It was a search that would take years to complete. Isis traveled the length of the Nile in a boat made of papyrus. The papyrus boat was special. Crocodiles would not attack a papyrus boat. They recognized it as sacred to Isis. So Isis could travel safely through waters filled with dangerous creatures. She stopped at every town. She questioned every person. She searched every temple and tomb. In each place Isis visited, she performed sacred rituals. She sang lamentations for Osiris. Her voice carried across the water. Her grief touched everyone who heard it. People wept with her. They shared her sorrow, and they redoubled their efforts to help her. The first piece was found in the city of Byblos. A farmer discovered it while plowing his field. The piece glowed with a faint divine light. The farmer knew immediately what he had found. He brought it to the local temple. The priests sent word to Isis. The goddess came quickly. Isis wept with joy when she saw the piece. It was Osiris's heart, the most important organ, the seat of wisdom and emotion. She held it carefully. She wrapped it in fine linen soaked in preserving oils. She placed it in a special container. One piece found, many more to go. Isis kept her promise to Abydos. She blessed the city. She declared that Abydos would become the most sacred city in Egypt. A great temple would be built there. It would be a place of pilgrimage. People would come from all over Egypt to worship at Abydos. And indeed, Abydos became one of the holiest sites in all of Egyptian history. More pieces were found over the following months. A fisherman pulled up a piece in his net near the city of Memphis. It was one of Osiris's arms. The fisherman brought it to Isis immediately. She blessed him and his family. She promised they would always have good catches. She promised his descendants would prosper. In Memphis, Isis built a shrine. She placed the arm there temporarily. She performed rituals to preserve it. And Memphis, like Abydos, became a sacred city. A temple was established. Priests were assigned to maintain it. The city flourished because it housed a piece of the divine king. A merchant traveling in the eastern desert found another piece. It was buried in the sand, but it had created a small oasis around it. Plants grew where nothing should grow. Water seeped up from underground. The merchant recognized this as a miracle. He dug carefully. He found one of Osiris's legs. The merchant brought the leg to Isis. She rewarded him with gold and precious stones. But more than that, she blessed his trading ventures. She promised he would always travel safely. She promised his business would thrive. And the merchant became wealthy and successful for the rest of his life. This pattern repeated across Egypt. Each time a piece was found, Isis came. Each time she built a shrine or temple. Each time she blessed the location and the people who helped. And slowly, piece by piece, Osiris's body was being reassembled. But not all pieces were easy to find. Some had been hidden in very remote places. Some were buried deep underground. Some were in dangerous locations. One piece was found in a cave inhabited by venomous serpents. Another was discovered at the bottom of a deep well. Each recovery was a challenge. Each discovery required courage and determination. Nephthys found several pieces herself. She searched the western desert where Set had his strongholds. This was dangerous work. Set's followers watched those areas, but Nephthys was clever. She disguised herself. She moved secretly. She found pieces that Set thought were safely hidden forever. The crocodiles kept their promise too. They searched the Nile thoroughly. They found 2 pieces that had been thrown into the water. The crocodiles brought these pieces to the surface near where Isis was traveling. They did not eat the sacred remains. They protected them, and Isis blessed the crocodiles, making them forever sacred in Egyptian religion. The jackals also fulfilled their oath. They ranged across the deserts with their keen noses. They could smell divine essence even when it was buried deep. They led Nephthys to several hidden pieces. They howled to alert her when they found something. And true to her promise, Nephthys made sure jackals would always be honored in Egyptian funeral rites. Years passed. The search continued without pause. Isis never rested. Even when she was exhausted, she kept searching. Even when the task seemed hopeless, she persevered. Her love for Osiris drove her forward. Her determination never wavered. She would find every piece if it took her entire existence. Gradually, the collection grew. 1 piece, 2 pieces, 5 pieces, 10 pieces. Each discovery brought Isis closer to her goal. Each piece was carefully preserved. Each was wrapped in linen and anointed with oils. Each was kept safe until the body could be reassembled. As more pieces were found, more temples were built. Egypt became covered with shrines to Osiris. Every major city had at least 1 temple. Some cities had several. These temples became centers of worship. They became places where people came to pray. They became repositories of wisdom and learning. The priests of these temples recorded everything. They wrote down the story of Osiris's murder. They documented Isis's search. They preserved the mythology for future generations. These writings would survive for thousands of years. They would tell the story of love and devotion that changed Egyptian religion forever. Finally, after years of searching, 13 pieces had been found. 13 parts of Osiris's divine body had been recovered. They were brought together in a secret location. Isis and Nephthys gathered all the pieces in one place. They prepared to reassemble the body. But one piece was still missing. One crucial piece had not been found, and this created a problem that would require all of Isis's magical skill to solve. The missing piece was Osiris's phallus. This part of his body had been thrown into the Nile. A fish had eaten it. The fish was the Oxyrhynchus fish. This fish had consumed the divine organ before anyone could recover it. It was the only piece that could not be retrieved. Without this piece, Osiris's body was incomplete. Without this piece, he could not be fully restored. Isis faced a dilemma. She had searched for so long, she had found almost everything, but this one missing piece threatened to undo all her work. However, Isis was the greatest magician among the gods. She had powers beyond imagining. If she could not find the missing piece, she would create it. She would use her magic to fashion a replacement. She would make Osiris whole again through the power of her will and her love. Isis gathered sacred materials. She collected gold from the mines of Nubia. She gathered precious stones from the eastern deserts. She harvested rare herbs that grew only in hidden places. She prepared magical oils infused with divine power, everything she needed for the greatest spell she would ever cast. Nephthys helped her sister with the preparations. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, also came to assist. Anubis was actually the son of Nephthys and Osiris. He had been conceived in a moment when Nephthys disguised herself as Isis. But that is another story. What matters now is that Anubis brought his knowledge of preserving the dead. He knew the sacred arts of mummification. Together, the three divine beings worked in secret. They chose a hidden temple far from Set's reach. They prepared the sacred chamber. They lit incense that filled the air with fragrant smoke. They chanted prayers in the ancient language of creation. They began the ritual that would reassemble Osiris. First, they laid out all 13 pieces. They arranged them in the proper positions. Arm connected to shoulder, leg connected to hip. Each piece was placed exactly where it belonged. The body began to take shape again. It looked almost whole, almost complete. Then Isis used her magic to create the missing piece. She formed it from gold and wax and sacred clay. She spoke words of power over it. She infused it with divine essence. She made it as real as flesh and bone. When she was finished, the replacement was perfect. It could not be distinguished from the original. Isis placed the created piece in its proper position. Now Osiris was whole again. His body was complete, but it was still just a body. There was no breath. There was no heartbeat. There was no life. The spirit of Osiris still wandered in the underworld. It had to be called back. Anubis began the embalming process. This was the first time anyone had ever performed these sacred rites. Anubis was inventing mummification. He was creating the rituals that Egyptians would use for thousands of years. Every step he took would become tradition. Every word he spoke would become sacred formula. Anubis washed Osiris's body with sacred water from the Nile. He dried it carefully. He anointed it with oils. He wrapped each limb in linen bandages. He placed protective amulets between the layers of cloth. He spoke spells of protection and preservation. He worked with perfect precision. He worked with reverent care. While Anubis wrapped the body, Isis prepared for the next phase. She would need to call Osiris's spirit back from the underworld. She would need to breathe life into his preserved form. This required magic more powerful than any she had used before. This required all her strength and all her love. Nephthys stood at the head of the body. Isis stood at the feet. Both sisters raised their arms. They began to chant. Their voices harmonized perfectly. The words they spoke were words of power. The names they called were secret names known only to the gods. The air in the chamber began to shimmer. Reality itself seemed to bend. The boundary between life and death grew thin. The veil between worlds began to part. Isis and Nephthys were opening a doorway. They were creating a path for Osiris's spirit to return. Isis transformed herself. She became a kite. This is a bird of prey similar to a hawk. She flew above Osiris's wrapped body. She circled it 7 times. With each circle, she called Osiris's name. With each pass, she beat her wings to create wind. This wind carried her words to the underworld. This wind called the wandering spirit home. On the 7th circle, something changed. The wrapped body began to glow. A faint light appeared in the chest. It grew brighter. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The spirit of Osiris was responding. The spirit was returning. Isis landed on Osiris's body. She perched there in her bird form. She spread her wings over him. She continued her chant. She called him back with all the force of her love. She promised she would never let him go again. She swore they would be together forever. And then, miraculously, Osiris's chest rose. He took a breath. It was shallow and weak, but it was breath. His heart began to beat. The rhythm was slow but steady. Color returned to his wrapped form. Life was flowing back into him. But Osiris's resurrection was incomplete. He could not return fully to the world of the living. He had been dead too long. He had crossed too far into the realm of death. He could revive, but only partially. He could wake, but only briefly. His time in the world of the living was limited now. Osiris's eyes opened. He saw Isis above him in her kite form. He recognized her instantly. He tried to speak her name. His voice was barely a whisper, but Isis heard it. She heard her beloved speak her name, and her heart filled with joy and sorrow mixed together. Isis transformed back to her goddess form. She knelt beside Osiris. She held him gently. She explained what had happened. She told him about Set's treachery. She described her long search. She recounted how she had found and reassembled his body. She spoke of her undying love. Osiris listened. Tears ran down his face. He was grateful beyond words. He was overwhelmed by what Isis had done for him. No one had ever shown such devotion. No one had ever loved so completely. He reached up and touched her face. They embraced. They held each other close. For a brief moment, they were reunited. For a precious time, they had each other again. But both knew this moment could not last. Osiris could not remain in the world of the living. His place was now in the realm of the dead. But before Osiris had to leave, Isis wanted one more thing. She wanted to conceive a child. She wanted to bear Osiris's son. This child would be their legacy. This child would avenge his father. This child would restore order to Egypt. So, in that sacred chamber, with Nephthys and Anubis standing guard outside, Isis and Osiris came together one final time. She used her magic to join with him. She used her power to draw forth his essence. And in that mystical union, a child was conceived. The moment of conception was marked by signs. The temple was filled with brilliant light. The air vibrated with power. The gods in heaven knew that something momentous had occurred. A child was being created who would change the fate of Egypt forever. After their union, Osiris grew weaker. His brief revival was ending. His spirit needed to return to the underworld, but now his death would have purpose. Now his journey to the land of the dead would have meaning. He would become the lord of the underworld. He would rule over the realm of the dead as he had once ruled over the living. Osiris spoke his final words to Isis. He told her to protect their unborn child. He told her to hide from Set until the boy was grown. He promised he would watch over them from the underworld. He said their love would never die. It would transcend death itself. It would last for all eternity. Then Osiris closed his eyes. His breathing stopped. His heart grew still. But this time, his death was different. This time he did not simply cease to exist. Instead, his spirit descended to the underworld consciously. He went there with purpose and power. He went there to establish a new order in the realm of the dead. Isis knew she was carrying Osiris's child. She could feel the divine life growing within her. This child was precious beyond measure. This child was the future of Egypt. This child would restore justice and order. But first, the child had to be born. And Isis had to keep him safe from Set. Set had declared himself the eternal king of Egypt. He ruled with cruelty and chaos. He oppressed the people. He destroyed the order that Osiris had created. The land suffered under his reign. The Nile floods became unpredictable. Crops failed. Famine spread. Egypt fell into darkness. But Set's greatest fear was that Osiris might have left an heir. Set knew that any son of Osiris would have the legitimate claim to the throne. Any child of Osiris and Isis would be rightfully king. So Set searched for Isis. He sent his followers to find her. He wanted to kill her before she could bear a child. Isis went into hiding. She fled to the deepest parts of the delta marshes. She took refuge among the papyrus reeds where she had been born. She lived simply and quietly. She disguised herself as a poor widow. No one would suspect that the great goddess lived among them in such humble circumstances. Nephthys came to help her sister. She brought food and supplies. She stood guard while Isis rested. She used her own magic to strengthen Isis's protective spells. The two sisters worked together to ensure the unborn child's safety. Months passed. Isis's belly grew round with the divine child. She felt him moving inside her. She spoke to him softly. She told him about his father. She promised him that one day he would reclaim his rightful throne. She sang lullabies that mixed joy and sorrow. The time for birth approached. Isis prepared a secret place deep in the marshes. She gathered the materials she would need. She called upon Nephthys and other friendly goddesses to assist with the delivery. Everything was ready. The child would be born in safety and secrecy. The labor began on a night when the moon was dark. The sky was filled with stars but no moonlight. This was fitting. The child would be born in darkness and hidden until the time came for him to shine. Isis endured the pain of childbirth with courage. She knew this pain would bring forth Egypt's salvation. Finally, after hours of labor, the child was born. It was a boy, a son, the heir of Osiris. Isis held him close to her chest. She looked at his tiny face. She saw Osiris in his features. She saw strength and wisdom even in this newborn infant. She named him Horus, Horus the Younger, Horus the Avenger. The baby cried lustily. His voice was strong. Even as a newborn, he showed the spirit of a warrior. Isis wrapped him in simple cloth. She held him and nursed him. She felt overwhelming love for this child. He was all she had left of Osiris. He was her hope for the future. But raising Horus would not be easy. Set's spies were everywhere. Set's followers constantly searched for any sign of Isis or a child. Isis had to be constantly vigilant. She had to move frequently. She had to trust no one outside her small circle of allies. Isis raised Horus in the marshes. She taught him to hide when strangers approached. She showed him how to live off the land. She began training him in magic from the moment he could understand words. She told him stories of his father every night. She made sure he knew his true identity and his destiny. As Horus grew, he became strong and quick. He learned to hunt in the marshes. He learned to fight with weapons. He learned spells and incantations. Isis poured all her knowledge into this child. She prepared him for the day when he would face Set. She made him ready to reclaim his throne. There were dangerous moments during Horus's childhood. Once, a scorpion stung him. The poison would have killed a mortal child. Isis used her magic to draw out the venom. She saved her son's life. Another time, Set's followers came very close to finding their hiding place. Isis created an illusion that led them away. She always found a way to protect Horus. Years passed. Horus grew from child to youth to man. He became tall and strong like his father. He had his mother's intelligence and magical knowledge. He had his father's sense of justice and leadership. He was ready. The time had come for him to challenge Set. Isis revealed everything to Horus. She told him the full story of his father's murder. She explained Set's treachery in detail. She showed him the temples that had been built where Osiris's body parts were found. She took him to meet the gods who would support his claim to the throne. Horus was filled with righteous anger. He swore he would avenge his father. He vowed he would defeat Set. He promised he would restore order to Egypt, and with his mother's blessing, Horus emerged from hiding. He announced his claim to the throne. He challenged Set directly. The battle between Horus and Set was long and fierce. It lasted for many years. They fought in the sky and on the earth. They fought in the desert and on the Nile. Each had victories, each suffered defeats. The conflict shook Egypt to its foundations. But this is where the story of Isis and Osiris reaches its conclusion, because the love between these two gods had accomplished its purpose. Isis's devotion had brought Osiris back long enough to conceive an heir. Her determination had protected that heir until he could fight. Her love had literally overcome death and ensured the continuation of divine justice. Osiris, in the underworld, became the judge of the dead. Every soul that died would come before him. He would weigh their hearts. He would determine if they had lived justly. Those who passed his judgment would enter paradise. Those who failed would be destroyed. Osiris brought order even to death itself. Isis remained the great mother goddess. She was worshipped throughout Egypt for thousands of years. People prayed to her for protection. Women called upon her in childbirth. Magicians invoked her name in their spells. She became one of the most beloved deities in all of Egyptian religion. The love between Isis and Osiris became the model for all marriages in Egypt. Husbands and wives looked to their story for inspiration. The devotion Isis showed became the ideal of faithfulness. The love Osiris gave became the standard of goodness. Their relationship transcended death and defined eternal love. Eventually, Horus did defeat Set. He reclaimed the throne of Egypt. He ruled with the wisdom of Osiris and the strength of Isis. He brought back the golden age that his father had created. Egypt flourished once more. Order was restored. Justice prevailed. But none of this would have been possible without Isis's love, her refusal to accept death as final, her determination to search the entire world, her courage to face any danger, her magic that could resurrect the dead, her devotion that created a new life. All of this came from love, pure, unconditional, eternal love. The story of Isis and Osiris reminds us that love is the most powerful force in existence. Love can overcome hatred. Love can survive separation. Love can transcend death itself. The love between these two gods changed the fate of Egypt. It established the order of the afterlife. It created a legacy that lasted for millennia. And even now, thousands of years after the last temple to Isis was closed, their story survives. It lives in the myths and legends passed down through generations. It lives in the archaeological remains of the temples built in their honor. It lives in the eternal human need to believe that true love never dies. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember Isis and Osiris. Remember that their love story is not just ancient mythology. It is a testament to the power of devotion. It is proof that love can achieve the impossible. It is a reminder that the bonds we forge with those we love can never truly be broken. Not by distance, not by time, not even by death itself. Sleep well, knowing that love like theirs still echoes through eternity.